So we're going to have 4 sessions this Ramadan. Every Saturday, we're going to talk about the battles of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And there's 2 reasons, at least 2 reasons, why we need to talk about the battles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of which is because this is the sunnah of the Salaf as-Salih, that the companions and the tabi'een and the atba' tabi'een used to tell their children when they were growing up the stories of the battles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order to prepare them for the level of sacrifice that it took to defend Islam and its lands. And the second reason, and this is just from me, from my pocket, not from any ulama, the second reason why I feel it's important and appropriate to talk about the battles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is because it enrages the enemies of Islam. Because the Zionists hate it. Because the Islamophobes, they want us to just say that Islam means peace. And they want us to never talk about war, never talk about jihad, and never talk about fighting. While they are the ones that are bombing, while they are the ones that are killing children, while they are the ones that are starving babies. And so in 2026, I think we can stop pretending like that's a good faith criticism from them. I think we can stop pretending and distancing ourselves from our own tradition when we've been watching genocides live streamed on our phones for over 2 years, both in Gaza and also what's going on in Sudan at the hands of the UAE and their affiliates. That we don't have to hide and pretend like we have anything to hide. Rather, in fact, when the entire world is disgusted by the mask being off, the Epstein class running everything, bombing any nation at once, attacking ships in the middle of the ocean with no reason or pretext anymore. Back then they used to have a reason or an excuse. They used to say that this is civilization, or we're spreading democracy, or we're going to this. Now it's over. They're not even pretending anymore. If this is the state, then we need to understand how the Prophet ﷺ conducted himself in battle. Because when you look at the example and the level, the bar, the standard set by the final messenger of Allah, alayhi salatu wasalam, you'll see that the entire world is in need of this example. The entire world needs to understand just warfare. The entire world needs to see the prophetic model of what it looks like when a prophet of God stands up for what is true and what is right and defends good against the evil. So the first battle, as you know, is the battle of Badr. But it didn't start there. There's much of the seerah and there's much of the prophetic mission before we get to Badr. And some of the scholars, such as from the subcontinent, Dr. Israr Ahmed, has periodized, meaning he's organized the seerah into different sections. And one of the sections that he says the first section was the section of passive resistance, meaning Muslims were an oppressed minority. And as an oppressed minority, in the state of passive resistance, you don't get to choose when you're persecuted. It happens to you. Police brutality, or someone who's trying to dox you, or someone who's coming after you, an ICE raid, whatever it looks like, it's not of your own choosing. And all you have to do and all you are able to do is suffer and hold on as best you can. And that's what the companions did. That's what the Prophet ﷺ did when they were tortured and they were martyred. Sumayya and Yasir and Ammar and the other people, Bilal, and the early Muslims that were tortured. But then, after the period of passive resistance comes the period of active resistance. And the difference is, now you start going out and picking your battles and choosing the time and place. Yes, you know you're going to be persecuted. You're still a targeted minority. But now you're going to the Kaaba to recite the Quran, even if it means you're going to be beat up by the Quraysh. You're going to trigger something because you know that the right is on your side, and the whole point is that you're creating a furqan. You're creating a furqan in society. The people who are sensitive to the truth will support you. The people who are sensitive to the truth will be sympathetic to you. And the people who are evil will expose their own hypocrisy. And by expose your own hypocrisy, and I don't want to get too far afield here, I mean, think about the Quraysh when they conducted a boycott on the Banu Hashim, on the people who were following Islam. Who were the people inside of Mecca who agitated for the end of this boycott. There was almost 3 years the Muslims were living outside of Mecca in the mountain valleys, eating leaves, to the point where the people inside Mecca would report that they could hear the screams of the children at night because of their hunger. But what was the reason that this boycott ended? It was actually some of the Quraysh. It was actually some of the people who were worshipping idols, the mushrikeen. But they actually understood, had more affinity towards their tribal code and said, what are we doing? This isn't even according to our beliefs. This isn't even according to our tribal code. And so they confronted Abu Jahl and they confronted the Quraysh who were responsible for the boycott in front of the Kaaba, and they pressured him, and that led to the dissolvement of the boycott. But this was the state until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave permission for the Muslims to make hijrah. But that was not the end of the story. Just because you leave and make hijrah, the forces of evil do not rest, and that's the first lesson. Leaving for Medina did not mean that everything was over. Leaving for Medina, it was not some promised land, 40 acres and a mule where they could just live out their lives and just ignore the forces that were going to, no, they were going to come after them. They couldn't sleep for a second. And so the Prophet ﷺ made preparations until he was given the permission to defend himself militarily. And that took the form of attacking the caravan. Now think about it. The Prophet ﷺ was a master strategist. Now the Muslims are in Medina. They're in between Mecca and Sham. He knows that the Quraysh have to travel north to go on their trade routes to make their money. That's their supply line. And so now that they're strategically located on that route, it's only natural that you would attack these trade lines in order to incapacitate your enemy. And so they do. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala plans something even greater. And this is another lesson, that when the Muslims, they organize themselves and they make the intention and they take the means, the result that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has in store is even greater than what the Muslims could have predicted. Allah describes it in the Quran. The Muslims left their house thinking it was going to be an easy, you're raiding a caravan. It's like taking candy from a baby. They're unarmed. But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had something greater in store. Abu Sufyan becomes aware of the Muslim raiding party, 300 odd companions, lightly armed. He takes a different route closer to the sea, down the Tihama, and he sends word to Mecca about the attack, and they gather an army 3 times the size of the Muslim force. 1,000 soldiers, properly equipped, properly armed, with proper provisions, marching to meet the Muslims in battle. Now when the Muslims come close and they realize what's going on, the Prophet ﷺ does something amazing. He asks the companions for their shura. He sees the opportunity in front of him. He knows the great victory that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is about to deliver. And yet he asks his companions, what do you want to do? And he has the muhajirun answer. They say, yes, we're with you, Rasulullah. And the other muhajirun, yes, we're with you, Rasulullah. The Prophet ﷺ keeps on asking until one of the Ansar, one of the people of Medina says, Ya Rasulullah, it's as if you want us to say something. You got the buy-in from the people of Mecca. It's as if you're waiting for the people of Medina. We told you. You came here and we gave you our word. We're ride or die. We're down for anything. We're ready. And so it took that second to align on their purpose. And they understood the risk, but they understood the reward and they trusted in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam sets up camp, preparing for battle, 2 things, maybe 3 things happen. And miracles start to happen. But before the miracles start to happen, one of the things the Prophet ﷺ, he shows his strategic genius. The Prophet ﷺ walks out from the camp until you can't see the Muslim camp anymore. And he finds a Bedouin. And he asks the Bedouin a question. Now see where he's going. He asks the Bedouin, hey, we heard there were Muslims in the area. Are you aware of this? Now, of course, he's a Muslim. Of course, he's part of the Muslim army, but he's acting for a minute as if he's not, in order to discern whether this person is trustworthy or not. And so the Bedouin answers, yes, they just set up camp. They're about this far away. There's about this many of them. Then the Prophet ﷺ asks his real objective. Then where are the Quraysh? Do you know anything about where the Quraysh are? And the Bedouin says, yes, they're about this far away and there's this many. So the Prophet ﷺ was using a very intelligent tactic of warfare, asymmetry of information, to not let everybody know what you know in order to determine what he was up against. Now, here's where the miracles start to happen. The companions, you can imagine, they're about to go to war, and this is very unnerving. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a miracle of making them drowsy, of making them fall asleep. And at the end of their sleep, He causes a light rain to fall, and it purifies them, as He describes in the Quran. It purifies them from their sins and prepares them to meet the enemy on the battlefield. And then as they awake, they are renewed and they have energy, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala described it. He made the Quraysh, when the Quraysh approach, He made the Muslims seem few in the eyes of the Quraysh, so that the Quraysh would become more arrogant, so that the Quraysh would become more confident that they would win, and careless. And we know that the enemies of Islam are two things, if nothing else: arrogant and careless. Then and now. And Allah said that He made the Quraysh seem few in the eyes of the Muslims just to settle their hearts. Because He knew, subhanahu wa ta'ala, if the Muslims saw, oh my goodness, look at how big this army, it would have been too great of a test. And He did all of that, and He took the fear out of the hearts of the Muslims, and He placed fear in the hearts of the enemies of the Muslims in order to achieve His goal, because it was amrun maqdura. It was something Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala already determined was going to happen. The defeat of evil and the triumph of good. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, جاء الحق وزهق الباطل إن الباطل كان زهوقا. Falsehood is always going to perish and truth will always prevail, but not until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demonstrates what He already knows internally, demonstrates who is ready to sacrifice, demonstrates who is patient with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, demonstrates who trusts in the promise of Allah's victory. And so the rest is history. They meet on the battlefield. The Prophet ﷺ scatters dust, and it blinds the eyes of the enemy. And angels come down and assist the companions and absolutely rout the enemy, to the point where even the Quraysh on that day were reporting that we heard strange things and we saw strange things that don't make sense, things that defy material causes and explanations. And the lesson and the takeaway, brothers and sisters, is this as we wrap up. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects two things from us. Two things. One is to take the means. Defeating the enemies of Islam doesn't happen by sitting in the masjid and raising your hands. That's where it starts, but that's not where it ends. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects you to take the means. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where it came, where are we going to put the camp and where are we going to be and how are we going to fight? All of the asbab, they took it, which will be demonstrated in future battles. But after you've done your homework, after you've exhausted your efforts and exhausted your abilities, everything that you can think of to do, then there's nothing left but to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is responsible for the results. And you have to be open and flexible to the possibility that the victory that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to deliver to you is even greater than the victory that you set out to achieve. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promises something even greater. So as we, in these days, face many, many enemies, and we see them for what they are, their masks are all off. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the patience like the patience of the companions. May Allah be pleased with all of them. Barakallahu feekum. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Whether you benefit from ISA's work offline or online, your support is a huge part of what makes it possible. So click below this Ramadan to support with your donation to this sacred cause, and know that Allah multiplies reward and wealth in this month like no other month.